He said I was the love of his life. But I spent 19 years waiting in the shadows while he tucked his lies into the arms of another woman every night. You're watching Ex-Wife Diaries, where every story is a truth someone was too afraid to tell. If this feels like it could be your story too, don't just watch. Feel it, like, share, and subscribe for more. My name is Renee. I'm 62 now, and for the first time in my life, I'm ready to speak the truth, not to expose him, not to shame anyone, just to finally hear my own voice, uncensored, echoing back to me. It started on a cold November evening. I was 43, divorced, and had just started to believe again, not in love, but in survival. My daughter was in college, my parents had passed, and my heart, still recovering from a 10-year marriage that collapsed under silence and neglect, had learned to beat without expecting anything in return. Then came Daniel. He wasn't the kind of man I ever imagined myself falling for. Too charming, too confident, the kind of eyes that made you forget your own name when he looked directly at you. But he didn't come to me like a firestorm. He came quietly, steadily. He was 47, a father of 2, married for over 2 decades. But not happily, he would say, almost rehearsed. We live separate lives, he told me the night he first touched my hand over coffee. We suffer under the same roof, but not the same world. I should have left then. I should have listened to that thud in my stomach that didn't feel like butterflies. But I was tired of being strong, tired of being alone, tired of watching happy couples in grocery stores and pretending I didn't care. And when a man like Daniel tells you that you're the one thing keeping him alive, you start to believe maybe love, real love, doesn't always come neatly packaged. We weren't scandalous. We weren't reckless. Our moments were carved out of silence and stolen time. Late-night phone calls when she was asleep, lunch breaks that turned into hour-long confessions, little gifts left in my mailbox. And once, just once, a weekend away, under different names, in a different state, pretending to be something we were not allowed to be. Every year, I asked him, "Are you leaving her this time?" And every year, he said, "Just one more year. The kids are almost grown. I just need it to be the right time." I told myself I wasn't that woman, the other woman. I told myself we were soulmates who met in the wrong life, that one day we'd be free. But 19 years passed. 19 birthdays. 19 Christmases where I got a text, not a visit. 19 years of pretending to be okay when he said, "I can't talk tonight." 19 times I told my friends I was still waiting, and 19 looks of pity in their eyes. And then just after his youngest got married, the moment I thought, this is it, he's free, Daniel changed. He grew distant. The warmth in his voice began to cool. His messages grew shorter. My calls went unanswered. I thought he was depressed. I thought maybe the reality of divorce was hitting him hard. Until the night I saw him. I wasn't following him. I wasn't spying. I was walking back from a dinner with my sister when I saw him in a restaurant window, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. She was radiant, younger, probably mid-40s, and her hand rested on his like it belonged there. I stood frozen. Not because he was cheating on her, but because he was cheating on me. He had moved on, and I hadn't even realized I'd been left behind. I didn't confront him right away. I waited. Maybe I was still hoping it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe I didn't want to break the illusion I had protected for nearly 2 decades. But the truth didn't care about timing. A week later, he told me, with a voice that sounded more guilty than sad, he said, "Renee, I met someone new." That was the first time he used the word new, not someone else, not another woman. New. like I was an old coat he'd worn too long and finally tossed. I asked him, "What about us?" And he said, "You know it was never going to be forever." That line, it hit like a car crash. All my memories shattered under it. The years, the birthdays, the tears, the waiting. He swept it all under one sentence. I wasn't set his forever. I was his comfort zone, his escape, his backup plan. And somehow, I had let myself be okay with that for 19 years. That night, I sat on my porch until sunrise. Not crying, not angry, just numb. The kind of numb that only comes when a truth you've been trying to avoid finally sits down beside you and refuses to leave. The next day, I blocked him, deleted his number, burned the letters he said written me. But his ghost still lingered. Not in my house, not in my phone, but in my mind. And I started to realize the hardest part of healing wasn't letting go of him. It was letting go of the version of me that loved him. The woman who believed he sapped to choose her. The woman who traded her best years for borrowed time. That Bets, who I simp trying to say goodbye to now. Not Daniel. Men. I stopped measuring time in years after that night. Days bled into each other. Some mornings I woke up thinking I'd dreamt it all, that Daniel would call like he always had to ask if I wanted coffee or to hear how tired he was of pretending at home. But the silence was louder now. Not the kind I used to wait through, but a final, unmistakable kind, like a door that shut and didn't creak anymore. I didn't cry in the way people expect. I didn't collapse on the floor or scream into pillows. I just stopped talking. To my friends, to my daughter, to myself. I didn't want advice. I didn't want to be told I was brave or foolish, or better off. I wanted someone to sit next to me and say, "Yes, this happened, and it hurts, and you're allowed to feel every inch of it." But no one really does that, do they? People want you to move on fast, especially after a breakup that technically was never public. I wasn't his wife. I wasn't even the woman on his Facebook page. I was the secret, and secrets don't get closure. They get erased. Still, something shifted in me in those weeks that followed. I began walking every morning. Not fast, not with headphones, just walking. My neighborhood looked different, more real. The cracks on the sidewalk, the wilting rose bush on Mrs. Halterman's porch, the teenager who always left his bike on the lawn. I'd lived among these details for years, but I'd never seen them. I'd been too busy waiting for a text, a call, a promise. It was on one of those walks that I passed a bookstore I hadn't visited in years. They had a little handwritten sign taped to the glass. "Tell us the book that changed your life." And for some reason, it stopped me cold. I stood there longer than I should have, thinking about how much of my life he had changed. Not a book, not a choice, not a dream, but him. And suddenly, I was angry. Really deeply angry. Not just at Daniel, but at myself. At the version of me who waited and waited and waited, who chose to live half a life while he lived two. That night, I opened my old journals, pages and pages filled with his name, things he said, excuses he made, hopes I clung to like a lifeline. I read them all, every painful entry. And when I reached the last page, I wrote a sentence I never had the courage to say out loud. I was not his choice. I was his convenience. And then I tore the whole book apart. The next few weeks became a ritual of letting go. I boxed up every gift, every photo, every handwritten note he'd left under my windshield or in my coat pocket. I didn't burn them this time. I donated them to silence. I dropped the box in a donation bin with no return address. And when I drove away, I didn't look back. But even after all that, the hardest part hadn't come yet. It came when I had to tell my daughter. She's 32 now, married, a mother of two. She knew I'd been seeing someone over the years, but I never told her the whole story. I didn't want her to think less of me, to see her mother, the woman who raised her alone, as someone weak, someone who settled. But when I sat across from her in that coffee shop and told her everything, she didn't flinch. She held my hand and said, "Mom, you didn't settle. You loved with everything you had. That's not weak. That's brave." I cried then, because for the first time, I realized I hadn't failed at love. I'd just given it to someone who didn't know what to do with it. And that's not shameful. It's just tragic. A few days later, I got an email from Daniel. Subject line: I'm sorry. It was short, just a few paragraphs. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, that he'd been thinking about me, that he realized too late what I had given him and what he had taken for granted. He didn't mention the new woman. He didn't ask for another chance. He just apologized. And for a moment, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to reply, to pour everything out, to ask him why he let it go on so long, to ask him why he said forever, but meant convenience. But I didn't reply. Because I didn't need his answers anymore. I had my own. I went on a trip after that, alone. I didn't go far, just a little cabin a few hours north, nestled in trees that smelled like pine and rain. I brought a stack of books, a journal, and an old sweater that still smelled like home. Not his, mine. And there, in that quiet cabin, I began to write something new. Not a letter. Not a goodbye. A beginning. The first sentence was shaky, but I wrote it anyway. I am not someone said's almost. I am not someone said's what if. I am not a secret. I am a woman who waited too long, but finally walked away. It's strange being free after so long. There are nights I still wake up expecting a message. Days when I glance at my phone wondering if his name will flash across the screen. But those moments pass now, like clouds, temporary, harmless. And sometimes, when I pass that bookstore, I stop and smile at the sign still taped in the window. Because I know the story that changed my life isn't in any book. It's the one I'm finally brave enough to write. It was 2 weeks after my cabin trip when something strange happened. I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. These days, I'd grown used to silence. But something in me, a flicker of curiosity I hadn't felt in months, pushed my thumb to the screen. "Hi, is this Evelyn?" I froze. Only a few people still used my full name. "This is Angela," the voice said softly. For a second, the world fell away. My mouth went dry. I didn't speak. She cleared her throat. "I know this is unexpected. I found your number in his old emails. I debated calling you. I debated it for years. Years." That word stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Why now?" I asked. There was a pause. "Because I just found out everything." I sat down. Angela began to speak, slowly, carefully. Her voice was steady, but I could feel the weight in it. She told me that Daniel had been acting strangely for months, withdrawn, restless, even paranoid. She'd assumed he was having another affair. But this time, he hadn't tried to hide it. He'd been sloppy, careless. He left his email open. Messages to me, photos, letters, drafts of letters he never sent. And with them, a file. The file with dates, records, voice memos, confessions. "He documented everything," she whispered, "for almost 20 years, like he wanted to confess, but didn't know how." My hands trembled, not with hope, with horror. I'd spent half my life believing I was the one in the shadows. But he'd been living in fear too, not of being caught, but of never being forgiven. "I don't know what you meant to him," she said. "But it was enough for him to write about you every week, even when he didn't see you." Tears blurred my vision. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to be remembered by a man who had buried me behind glass for 19 years. Angela wasn't cruel. She didn't accuse me. She didn't blame me. In fact, she apologized. "I think I knew," she admitted, not consciously, but a woman always knows the difference between absence and betrayal. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. At the end of the call, she asked if I wanted to see the file. I said yes. The next morning, a package arrived. No note, just a thick yellow envelope, slightly torn at the corner, as if it had been opened and resealed 100 times. Inside were 19 years of fragments, emails, photos, receipts, even old napkins with our handwriting on them, and at the very bottom, a letter, folded, yellowed, addressed to me. It wasn't dated, but the ink was smudged, like it had been written with hands that were shaking. "Evelyn," it began, "I don't know when you said I'll read this, or if, but I have to believe that someday you will, because this is the truth I never had the courage to give you." The letter was raw, unpolished, not like the charming messages he used to write me. This one was different. It was full of fear, shame, and something else I never expected: regret. He wrote about the first time he saw me in the library, how he pretended to need help with a book just to talk to me, how he never expected to fall in love, not like that, not at that age, not while married. He admitted that he thought he could have both lives, that he told himself it was temporary, that he'd fix it, that he'd find a way to leave cleanly. But the years passed and the lines blurred, and suddenly the lie was his normal. He said he hated himself for every birthday he missed, every promise he made, then broke, every time I cried and he pretended not to notice. But most of all, he said he hated how much he needed me, and still didn't choose me. It wasn't a love letter. It was a confession. And reading it didn't heal me. It shattered me all over again. Because for 19 years, I thought I was waiting for him to be brave. But maybe he was always just afraid. Afraid of hurting her. Afraid of losing his reputation. Afraid of what his kids would think. Afraid that I would change my mind once he finally showed up for real. I folded the letter back up. I didn't keep it. I buried it. Not in the trash. Not in a fire. I drove to the place where he and I used to meet, the small park on the east side of town near the river bend. It hadn't changed. Same crooked bench, same old tree stump we once carved our initials into with a penknife. I placed the letter under that stump and walked away. For good. That night, I made a decision. I was done being the woman people whispered about. I was done being the ghost in someone else's story. I booked a photography class, signed up for a women's SIPS writing circle, started volunteering twice a week at a local animal shelter. And then something unexpected happened. One of the women in my writing circle, Marla, a widow in her 60s, asked me what I was writing. I hesitated. But then I told her everything. She didn't look shocked or awkward. She smiled gently and said, "You should tell that story out loud. There are more of us than you think." I didn't believe her until the next session, when 3 other women shared stories that echoed mine, different names, different timelines, but the same ache, the same quiet endurance. We weren't weak. We weren't naive. We were just taught to wait, to forgive, to believe in change, even when it never came. But not anymore. Now, we were writing our own endings. And mine, it didn't set end with him. It began the moment I realized that I deserved more than someone's silence. I deserved someone's whole voice. 2 months passed. The writing circle became my anchor. I was still grieving, not just Daniel, but the 19 years of believing in a future that was never meant to exist. That grief didn't come in waves anymore. It came in shadows, in strange moments when the grocery store felt too quiet, or when a jazz song played on the radio, and I instinctively turned to tell him about it, and remembered he was a ghost I'd entertained for too long. Marla invited me to lunch one Friday after our session. She chose a small French cafe near the city museum, old world charm, velvet chairs, waiters with accents they probably rehearsed in college. I wore a navy scarf, the same one Daniel once gave me on a trip to Santa Fe. I didn't know why I kept wearing it. Maybe I liked the way it held memories, or maybe I hadn't fully let go, despite what I told myself. Marla leaned in over her tea. "Have you ever thought of publishing it?" she asked, referring to my story. I laughed, softly. Who would want to read about a woman who wasted her best years on someone else's promise? She didn't laugh. Every woman I know has. That stayed with me. Not her words, but her tone, like she wasn't speaking from pity, but from experience. That evening, I opened my laptop and started shaping the journal entries I'd scribbled since Angela's call. I didn't intend to make it into anything big. Just something real, something that would outlive the ache. Then, something strange happened. I got a message on Facebook from an account with no profile picture, just a name I hadn't seen in decades. Jonas Becker. It took me a moment to place it. Jonas had been Daniel's oldest friend, practically a brother. We met only a handful of times, but I remembered his presence. Quiet, observant, the kind of man who never talked unless he had something worth saying. His message was short. "Evelyn, I came across something you need to see. Can we talk?" Every cell in my body screamed caution. But curiosity won. We met the next afternoon at a bookstore downtown. He hadn't changed much. A little grayer, lines deeper around his eyes, but the same quiet strength. He hugged me like someone who knew the weight I carried, even if he didn't know the full story. "I debated reaching out for years," he said after we sat down. "I always thought it wasn't sent up my place." I stayed quiet. Let him speak. He pulled a manila folder from his coat. "After Daniel passed, I went through some of his storage. He asked me to handle things, personal stuff, loose ends. I found this tucked in an old guitar case. I think it was meant for you." Inside were 2 items. A photograph, me and Daniel, taken from behind, walking along the beach. I didn't even know it existed. And a sealed letter. Not one of the rambling, guilt-filled ones. This one was different. I opened it slowly. The paper was thick, ink fresh. He had written it a year before his death. "I know you think I never chose you." It began, but I did. 1,000 times. I just didn't act on it. And I will never forgive myself for that. He talked about his guilt. Yes, but also about his fear of destroying people, including me. He confessed that he kept delaying the moment because he believed that as long as the future hadn't arrived, it was still full of possibility, a fantasy, a someday. But someday, he wrote, had become a cage for both of us. He ended with something I never heard from him in person. "I'm sorry for wasting your time, but even more, I'm sorry for wasting mine, because all the years I thought I was protecting you from pain, I was really just protecting myself from the truth." Jonas watched me read in silence. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked me in the eyes. I think he loved you, he said quietly. But I think he loved the idea of being someone brave even more. I don't know why, but that broke something open in me. Not anger, not sorrow, clarity. For the first time, I realized that Daniel's tragedy wasn't that he betrayed two women. It was that he betrayed himself by believing he could live a whole life in halves. Jonas and I stayed at the bookstore for hours, talking about Daniel, about life, about choices and their aftermath. And somewhere between the second coffee and the closing bell, I told him the one thing I hadn't said out loud in 19 years. I think I knew he said, "Never come," I whispered, but I needed the hope. Because without it, I didn't know who I was. Jonas didn't respond with pity. He nodded, slowly, then said something I'll never forget. "Maybe now you get to find out." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from sadness, from something else. A quiet, unexpected sense of possibility. What if I wasn't broken? What if I was just unclaimed? Not by a man, but by myself. I opened my window. The night air was cool, fresh. For the first time in years, I didn't imagine him beside me. I didn't need to. I had become my own witness. And in that moment, I knew the story wasn't about how long I waited. It was about how I finally stopped. The morning after I read Daniel's letter, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, not to admire anything, just to look, to study the woman who had been waiting 19 years for someone else to tell her who she was. I saw everything. Every line carved from holding back tears. Every gray strand I once colored out of shame. Every inch of skin that had stretched and softened through the years of loving and losing. I whispered out loud, as if testing the sound, "He didn't choose me." And then, softer. "But maybe I can." There was something almost freeing about saying it, a strange sense of relief. Like I had finally stopped running toward a finish line that never existed. Later that week, I returned to the beach house. Not for Daniel. For me. It was still filled with echoes of him. His guitar leaned against the corner. His cologne faintly clung to the pillowcases. And yet, it didn't hurt like before. I walked through every room like I was reclaiming it, not as a shrine, but as proof that I had lived a real love, even if it ended in betrayal. I spent 3 days there, wrote almost constantly. Pages flowed like they were waiting all along, hiding behind silence. I didn't cry much. Just once, when I found a tiny note he had scribbled on the inside of a book cover. "To Evelyn, in another life." But this was the only life, and I was done living it halfway. On the 4th morning, I got a call from Angela. Her voice was clipped. "I wasn't sure if I should reach out," she said. "But there's something you need to know about Daniel and about me." I hesitated. Then said, "Go on." She exhaled. "He told me about you. Eventually, not the full story, but enough. I found messages. And I confronted him." I didn't respond. She continued. "I was angry, of course, but I was also tired of pretending we were still a couple. We hadn't been for years. He moved into the guest room 2 Christmases ago. I felt my breath catch. She wasn't finished. He was never going to leave. Not you, not me, not the kids. He kept us all dangling like we were pieces of a life he didn't know how to finish building." There was a long silence, and then she said it. "The night before he died, he tried to come clean to all of us. Me, the boys, even his sister. He wanted to confess everything, not because he was noble, but because I think he was scared that his time was almost up." My heart thudded. I wanted to hate her. but I couldn't. She was grieving too. Maybe not a man, but the illusion of a marriage she once believed in. She paused again, then asked quietly, "Can I send you something?" That night, a package arrived. Inside was a video file on a flash drive. I waited hours before playing it. When I did, the screen lit up with Daniel's face, older, fragile, but eyes still sharp. "I don't know who will watch this first," he began. "Angela? Evelyn? Maybe both?" He sighed, rubbed his face. "I wasted my life running between two women who deserved better than a coward I never chose. I just postponed. Every year I told myself I needed more time, but really, I was terrified of who I said to be without the lies." He looked directly at the camera, voice softer. "Evelyn, I loved you, but I didn't respect you enough to let you go when I knew I wouldn't to leave. And that's the worst thing I ever done." The screen froze. I stared for minutes. Maybe hours. I don't remember blinking. He had spoken the words I thought I needed, but they didn't make me feel better. They made me feel numb. I realized in that moment that I wasn't looking for his apology anymore. I was looking for mine, to myself. I went for a walk. Cold wind, empty streets. I passed couples, families, strangers. No one noticed me, and for the first time, I liked that. Because I wasn't trying to be seen. I was trying to see myself. A few days later, Jonas called again. He'd found more of Daniel's belongings and asked if I wanted to go through them together. We met at a small storage facility. It smelled like damp cardboard and time. There were boxes, binders, a leather journal I'd never seen. Jonas handed it to me. He started writing again during his treatments. I opened the journal carefully. Most of it was scribbled lyrics, unfinished thoughts, sketches of poems. But then I turned to a page with a single sentence. I told her I love her forever, but I never told her I stay. I closed the journal. That was it. The final confirmation. I had built a life on promises made in the dark, never tested by the light. And yet, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. In the following weeks, I made changes. I gave notice at work, not because I was running away, but because I finally wanted to run toward something. I enrolled in an online writing program. I submitted an essay, the one about the scarf, the letter, the bookstore. It got accepted in a literary journal. Small steps, but they felt like thunder to me. One evening, I sat in the same cafe where Marla and I first had lunch. I brought a fresh journal. No plans, just blank pages. And just as I uncapped my pen, someone slid into the seat across from me. "Jonas." "I was in the area," he said with a small smile. "Thought I sent check on the famous author." I smiled, genuinely, not forced. Turns out, writing about heartbreak is cheaper than therapy. He chuckled, then turned serious. "You know, Daniel was lucky." I raised an eyebrow. "He got to be loved by you." That night, I walked home under a pale moon, alone, no hand to hold, no promises in my ear. But I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. 3 weeks passed before I saw Jonas again. Not because I was avoiding him, but because I was learning how to live without needing someone else's heartbeat to measure my own. Still, when I got his message, "I found something of yours, or maybe of his, not sure." I felt the stirrings of old tension, not fear, just the uncomfortable kind of curiosity that lives between closure and confusion. We met in a public park this time. He handed me a worn leather pouch. It was taped beneath one of the drawers in the storage unit. He said, "I almost missed it." Inside was a small silver key and a folded sheet of paper. No explanation, just a time and a location, 9 p.m., Brighton Pier. Daniel Sepp's final breadcrumb. I should have thrown it away. I should have burned it and let the smoke carry him away. But of course I went. That evening, I dressed carefully, not to impress. That part of me had died long ago, but to protect, like armor. The pier was nearly empty. A few teenagers hovered near the arcade. Somewhere, a saxophone played softly, echoing off the wooden slats. I followed the coordinates and found a small storage locker near the maintenance shed. The key fit perfectly. Inside, a faded manila envelope. No name, no signature, just documents. Bank statements, property deeds, insurance forms, and a letter this time not addressed to me, but to his sons. My hands trembled as I scanned it. He confessed everything, not just about me, about hidden investments, secret loans, a second apartment he kept for years and never told anyone about, a life lived in shadows while everyone else lived in his light. And at the bottom of the envelope, a sealed will, dated 3 months before his death. I blinked, then read the name of the sole beneficiary. Mine. I sat down on the edge of the pier, heart thudding like it might escape my chest. It wasn't said about the money. It was what it meant. After all the years of being second, hidden, postponed, he'd finally made a choice. But it didn't feel like justice. It felt cruel. Too little, too late. I didn't cry. I felt cold, like someone had opened a window inside my soul and let winter in. The next morning, I called Angela. She was quiet for a long time after I told her. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I seemed not angry," she said. "Strangely, I seemed just relieved it. Seemed all out. We were all living in some version of a lie. Now we get to decide what seems real." She didn't fight me on the inheritance. Didn't contest the will. Didn't odd scream. She simply said, "Do what you want with it, but please don't disappear." I think we owe each other at least some kind of peace. That evening, I made tea and stared out the window for hours. The money sat, untouched, in an account. The property deed to the beach house. Now in my name, and yet none of it brought me joy. Just questions. What does it mean to be chosen after the end? Does it erase the years you weren't set? Or is it just guilt, packaged with a ribbon? I decided to donate most of it. A scholarship fund. Women rebuilding their lives after divorce or betrayal. A small writing grant. No publicity, no name on the checks. Just quiet redemption. One night, Marla came over with a bottle of wine and her usual too loud laugh. We sat on my porch, barefoot, talking about everything and nothing. She looked at me closely. "You look different," she said. "Older," I teased. "No, lighter." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. And then I told her. Everything. From the scarf, to the pier, to the will. She didn't interrupt. Just listened. Like real friends do. And when I finished, she took my hand. "You know," she said, "it was never about whether he leave her. It was about whether you ever choose to leave him. Emotionally, spiritually. You were the one still waiting in that room." That hit me like thunder. Because she was right. I had waited 19 years for a man who couldn't decide. But I had also waited 19 years to finally choose myself. That week, I started writing again. Really writing. Not just journal entries or unsent letters, but stories, characters, dialogues, worlds that didn't look like mine, but felt like mine. A publisher noticed one of my short stories online. It wasn't said much, but it was something, a seed. 2 months later, I packed a small bag and went to Italy. Just for a few weeks, I told myself, but I stayed all summer, walked ancient streets, ate alone in candlelit cafes, took photographs of ruins and lovers and shadows, wrote every morning by the sea. No one knew me there, and that was the best part, because I got to meet me again without anyone else's story weighing down mine. One evening on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, I read one of my pieces aloud at a tiny literary gathering. When I finished, an older woman approached me, hair silver, eyes bright. She touched my arm. Your story, it was mine once too. Different names, same ache. We stood there, two strangers, bound by heartbreak and healing. And I realized something. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever waited, who had ever hoped, who had ever survived. I flew back in the fall. The beach house felt different now. Not haunted, not sacred, just mine. I repainted the walls, tore down the memories, and rebuilt them in my voice. I hadn't expected to run into his son again. It had been nearly a year since Daniel's death, and life had settled into a kind of calm rhythm, the kind you don't trust yet, but begin to hope is real. My mornings started with tea and silence, no messages, no expectations, just peace. So when I saw Michael, Daniel's eldest, standing on the porch of the beach house one afternoon, I froze. He hadn't called, hadn't written. He looked older, wearier than I remembered, like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. I didn't come to argue, he said softly, eyes searching mine. I just need to understand. I nodded, stepped aside. He didn't look around the house. He didn't ask about the money or the will. He pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket. My mother found this in one of Dad's old boxes. She didn't read it, said it was addressed to you, but she figured you already gotten a copy. I not so sure. He placed it on the table and left without waiting for tea or explanation. When I opened it, I knew immediately this was older than the other one. Handwritten, dated 6 years before his death. It began with my name. Not my love or dearest, just Elena. His penmanship wavered in parts. The words were raw, scattered, unpolished. The kind of truth that doesn't come when someone's trying to make themselves look good. He wrote about the years we spent in limbo. About the fear, the guilt, the cowardice he wrapped in promises. He said he always believed he'd eventually leave her, but never truly planned when, because there was always some event, some excuse, some illusion of timing that never came. He said I was the only thing that felt real, but he hadn't known how to live honestly with real. I read it 3 times, not because it was comforting, but because it confirmed something I had always suspected. He had loved me, but never enough to choose discomfort. I burned the letter in the fireplace that night, not out of anger, but because I didn't need his apologies to define my recovery. I needed space not filled with his regrets. Marla visited again, a few weeks later. We sat on the sand with glasses of chilled wine, talking about nothing and everything, the weather, the garden, our aching knees. She watched me closely. "You've changed again," she said. "How so?" "You've not waiting anymore, not even for the pain." I smiled. Not because it was true, but because I was trying. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a local book club. Not about Daniel, not about loss, about characters. The fictional ones I'd created in my stories. Women who had loved too long, waited too hard, and finally burned their bridges, not in anger, but in liberation. A woman in the audience, probably in her early 70s, approached me after. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "My lover promised for 24 years. He never did. I thought if I told anyone, they said say I was foolish." "You weren't sit foolish," I said. "You were just faithful. Sometimes that sit bends not a flaw. Sometimes it sit bends just misplaced." She held my hand for a long time. That night, I wrote again. This time, not about Daniel, not even about me, but about the weight itself, what it does to your body, how it trains your ears to memorize the sound of disappointment, how it convinces your spine to curve inward, like it's bracing for the next blow, how even your laugh, your real belly-deep laugh, gets quieter over time, as if happiness needs permission. But I also wrote about what happens after, when the waiting ends, when the silence is no longer empty, but peaceful, when the mirror stops reflecting shame and starts showing a woman who survived herself. In November, I hosted a small gathering at the beach house. Just 10 women. No agenda, no introductions. We called it the endings table. Everyone brought one story they had never told anyone else, and a dish from their childhood. We cried. We laughed. One woman burned an old engagement photo on the deck, while we all clapped. Another read aloud a letter she'd written to the woman her husband had left her for but never sent. I realized then that healing doesn't look like closure. It looks like connection. It looks like women holding space for each other without judgment, without comparison. It looks like rewriting your story out loud and hearing someone whisper "me too." In December, I saw Michael again. This time, not on my porch, but at the grocery store. He smiled, a little awkwardly. We stood in line together, talking about nothing. The weather, inflation, his mother's recent move. And then he said something I wasn't expecting. "She forgives you, you know." I blinked. "Angela." He nodded. "She says she hated you for years, but now she sees it wasn't really about you. It was about Dad, about his cowardice, his indecision. You were a symptom, not the cause." I didn't know what to say. But then he added, "She said if you ever wanted to talk, she said, listen." I haven't called her yet. Maybe I will. Or maybe the fact that we both know the truth now, without needing to explain or apologize, is enough. As the year ended, I found myself standing alone at the edge of the pier once more. Not because I was searching, but because I was anchoring. This place used to be a symbol of what never came. Now, it was mine. Fully mine. The air was cold, but not cruel. The sky burned with the last hints of sunset. I closed my eyes and breathed in. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I sat at the window that morning with my robe pulled tight around me, the steam from my coffee rising like ghosts from a time I no longer trusted. The birds were chirping, just as they had every morning for the last 19 years. But something about today felt too quiet, too still. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth I had spent so many years avoiding was finally on its way to my doorstep. The last conversation I'd had with Daniel, if you could even call it that, had ended with silence. No goodbyes. No apologies, just that emptiness I used to only feel on weekends when he'd return to her instead of staying with me. Now, it followed me like a shadow in the daylight. He had promised me for years that it was me, that he just needed time, that the children needed to grow up, that his wife wasn't well, that the timing wasn't right, that loving me in secret was better than losing me altogether. But what he never said out loud, what I refused to hear, is that men like Daniel don't leave. Not really. They hover between worlds, always keeping one hand on the life they pretend to be done with, while telling you you're their future. It took me 19 years to realize I was never his future. I was his escape hatch. When the doorbell rang, my heart jumped. I knew it couldn't be him. He hadn't dared show up in weeks, but still, I rose, smoothed down my robe, and opened the door like a woman half my age hoping for a different ending. Instead, it was a delivery driver, a small envelope with my name on it. No return address, just my name, scribbled in that same familiar handwriting that once wrote me letters under hotel lamps and whispered promises in the margins of stolen moments. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Not typed, not long, just a few short lines. I said, "I'm sorry. I tried. I just don't know how to live without her. You deserved more. You always did." That was it. 19 years, 3 miscarriages I never told him about. A life on pause, all condensed into 7 sentences and a signature. Daniel. I stood there for a long time, reading and rereading each word like they might rearrange themselves into something braver, but they never did. He was gone, back to her. Or maybe she never truly let go of him. Maybe she was the one who knew how to fight, while I only knew how to wait. I didn't cry that day. Not at first. I folded the letter, set it on the kitchen counter, and made toast. I watched it brown like nothing had happened. I answered emails, changed the sheets, and walked around the house like a ghost still performing the tasks of the living. But by nightfall, when I laid in the bed I had once imagined he'd share with me for good, the silence became a scream. I sobbed. Not for him. Not even for me. I sobbed for the years I gave to a man who never intended to choose me. For the birthdays spent alone with cake for 2 but only 1 plate. For the dinners where I'd light a candle, just to feel like he might walk in any second. For the way I allowed my heart to shrink just to fit into the small spaces he offered me. I had made him a home in my soul, and he had only ever rented. The next day, I told no one, not friends, not my sister. I couldn't bear the "told you so" stares or the well-meaning advice that always came too late. Everyone always assumed I was the foolish one. Maybe I was, but at least I loved with everything I had, even when I shouldn't have, even when I knew better. But there was one thing I could do now. I could stop waiting. So I began to pack, not his things. He'd never left anything real behind, just a few forgotten shirts, some wine bottles, and a framed photo we once took at a beach town 3 hours away. I packed my illusions, my what-ifs, my maybes. I threw them in a box labeled "Enough" and taped it shut. I started calling old friends. I hadn't seen them in years, always too busy hoping he'd call. I got my hair done. Not for him, but for the woman I used to be before I let him dull me. I went to the bookstore and didn't avoid the couples holding hands in the aisles. I bought a plant and named it Mercy, because that's what I needed to show myself for wasting 19 years and still surviving it. But healing is cruel in its own way, because just when you begin to feel the warmth of your own freedom, the past comes knocking again. 3 weeks later, I got another letter. This one wasn't handwritten. It was typed. Clean, cold. "Elaine, I made a mistake. I need to see you, please, just once." My fingers tightened around the paper. There was no return address this time either. Just a phone number scribbled at the bottom. Not his. But I knew it was real. It was the kind of number a man gives when he's left his house and isn't ready to say where he's gone. I didn't sit call. Not that day. Because I was no longer the woman who waited by the phone. I was the woman who had spent 19 years living for someone else's bravery, and I finally had enough of being second. But inside me, A storm was brewing again. What if he meant it this time? What if he had finally chosen me when I no longer wanted to be chosen? And yet, a part of me still wanted to see his face. Not for love, but for closure. Because sometimes you need to hear it straight from their lips to stop replaying the echo in your head. I folded the second letter, placed it in the same drawer as the first, and stared out the window again. The birds were still chirping. The world was still spinning, but something in me had changed. This time, if he showed up, I wasn't sure I'd open the door. I finally dialed the number the next morning. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed to hear his voice tremble. Maybe I wanted to see if he even answered. But mostly, I think I needed to know whether he'd say something different, something that would change everything, or confirm what I already knew. The phone didn't ring more than once. "Elaine," he said. Like he said, been sitting there holding his breath, waiting for me to finally give in. I didn't say his name. I let silence do the talking. He waited a moment, then added, "I didn't no if you said call." I wanted to say, "You knew I would. You've always known I would. That's what made it so easy for you to stay gone." Instead, I asked, "Where are you?" "A motel," he said, "just outside town. I left last week, for good." I laughed. Bitter? Hollow? "You think that means anything now?" "No," he said quietly. "I know it doesn't set." There was another silence, but this one was different. It didn't feel like avoidance anymore. It felt like two people standing on either side of a bridge that had already burned. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. It was cruel to say it now, after 19 years of delays and half-truths and empty promises, after I had spent the last month sewing my life back together with thread made of my own stubbornness, after I had learned how to walk again without waiting for his footsteps behind me. And still, my heart betrayed me. It fluttered like it used to when I saw his name on my phone. That reflex doesn't go away just because someone's done you wrong. The body always remembers what the heart begged it to forget. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, and I meant it. Did he think I would welcome him back with open arms? That I'd pretend the last few weeks hadn't happened? That I'd erase the ache that had aged me faster than the years ever could? "I want to talk," he said, face to face. "Just once, please." I didn't answer. Not then. But the next day, I found myself driving. Not to the motel. Not yet. I drove to the park where we used to meet before he had the courage to invite me inside his world. We would sit under a maple tree with coffee and pastries, pretending like time wasn't ticking toward 5 p.m. when he'd always have to leave. That tree still stood, and I sat beneath it now like I was mourning someone who hadn't died, just disappeared. I tried to remember the version of me that used to sit there, hopeful, starry-eyed, willing to take scraps and call them love. That woman was still inside me, but now she was older, wiser, a little more jaded, and a lot less willing to be anyone's second choice. That evening, I drove to the motel. Room 112. The curtains were drawn. I knocked. He opened the door, and for a split second, I saw the same man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The crooked smile, the tired eyes, but then the moment passed, and I saw something else. A man who had lived comfortably in indecision for nearly 2 decades and finally lost both women in the process. He looked like someone who had finally run out of lies. "Hi," he said quietly. I stepped in. The room smelled like stale air and loneliness. He had a single suitcase by the bed, a coffee cup on the nightstand. The TV was playing a muted news channel, something to fill the silence, I assumed. He turned it off. "It's not staying long," I said. I know. He looked down, ran his fingers through his hair like it might help him find the words. But I didn't want a speech. Not anymore. I wanted something honest, something real. Why now? I asked. He looked up, surprised. Why did you leave her now? After all this time, he swallowed. Because I realized I never stopped thinking about you. Don't it lie. He took a breath. Because she found out about us. Again. This time she left first. I nodded. Finally, the truth. And it burned more than any lie ever had. So you came here because you had nowhere else to go? I said. No, he protested. Elaine, I came here because you said you're the only person I said I've ever loved. I looked at him. Really looked at him. His face was lined, older, a little gaunt, but it wasn't the years that aged him. It was the weight of his own cowardice. And yet, despite everything, a part of me still wanted to believe him. That part was the most dangerous thing in the room. You don't get to choose me just because she didn't, I said. I didn't come here to beg. Yes, you did. He was quiet. Then he asked, almost whispering, have you stopped loving me? It was a question that deserved more time than I could give it, but the answer was already forming. I think, I said slowly. I started loving myself more. He didn't speak. His eyes dropped to the floor. Then back to me, and I could see it. That moment when a man realizes he's run out of chances. I turned to leave. He didn't stop me. Back at home, I sat in the kitchen and opened the drawer where I'd kept the letters. I took them out, placed them in the sink, and lit a match. They curled and blackened into ash within seconds. Just like our story. Beautiful. Until it wasn't, long, but never lasting. When the flames died, I washed the sink clean, and then I made dinner for one. But this time the table didn't feel empty, because I wasn't waiting anymore. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. There's a strange kind of peace that follows a storm, not the relief of resolution, but the awareness that nothing more needs to be said. I had carried the weight of what if for nearly 2 decades, and now, for the first time, there was nothing left to imagine. He had come. He had left, and I had survived it all. I found myself walking more, without a destination, just me, the sound of my shoes on the pavement, and the wind folding through the trees like whispers I no longer needed to hear. It was strange, how easily the world moved on while my world had shifted. The postman still waved at the gate, the neighbors still watered their flowers, the supermarket still rearranged the aisles like nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I saw an elderly couple one afternoon on a bench at the lake. They weren't holding hands. They weren't talking, just sitting side by side with that kind of silence that only comes from years of knowing someone's every breath. I used to envy that. I used to think love meant having someone grow old with you. But now I realized love didn't always come wrapped in that picture. Sometimes love meant learning how to grow old with yourself. I started cleaning out the house, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to reclaim it, room by room, memory by memory. I found the old letters again. Not his, mine, buried at the bottom of a drawer in the guest room I never used. Letters I wrote, but never sent. Letters full of hope, rage, dreams, longing, versions of myself I barely recognized. In one dated 2014, I had written, "If you ever show up at my door, please be braver than I was when I fell in love with you." He hadn't sent them then, but maybe I was. One evening, my daughter called, the one I had almost lost in the chaos of a love that never made space for her. We hadn't spoken deeply in months, Not since she'd asked why I kept choosing a man who didn't choose me. I answered on the first ring. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Just checking in." And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to tell her I was okay. I was okay. And maybe she could hear it in my voice, because she relaxed into the conversation. We talked for an hour about nothing, about everything. And when she said, "I miss you," I believed her. I started writing again, not letters this time, just stories, truths hidden behind fiction, about women who waited, about women who walked away, about the cost of patience and the price of freedom. I didn't write for him. I wrote for me, and for every woman who sat in the same chair I once did, watching the clock, waiting for someone who would never fully arrive. One morning, I saw him. Not in person, in the newspaper. A small mention, his name listed in the public records of divorce filings. It felt surreal. After all these years, it was finally real. He was no longer hers, but he wasn't mine either. And I smiled, not out of victory, but because I didn't feel anything at all. That was the win. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. But I knew his handwriting instantly. "Elaine, I hope this finds you well. I've started over in another town. Small place, quiet. I thought of calling you again, but I didn't want to reopen anything. I just wanted to say thank you for loving me, even when I didn't deserve it. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I know I let it rot. Who'll carry that?" Mince. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of the kitchen drawer, not because I needed to keep it, but because I didn't feel the need to destroy it either. It was just something that happened. Life was full of those. Later that month, I attended a book club for the first time in years, hosted by a friend of a friend. I walked in late, awkward, unsure, but someone smiled at me. A man, probably close to my age. He moved over to make room. I thanked him, sat down, and didn't think much of it, until he said softly, "You look like someone who has a story to tell." I didn't respond, but I felt it, that twinge, that tiny flicker of something I thought had gone cold. After the club ended, we walked out together. "He's Ann Thomas," he said. "Elaine." We shook hands. And that was it. No sparks, no thunder, just possibility. That night, I stood at the mirror brushing my hair, and I caught my own reflection. Not the tired eyes or the worry lines, but something deeper. I looked like a woman who had lived, loved, lost, and found herself in the ruins. I whispered to my reflection,
"We made it."
I didn't need to know what came next. I didn't need to map out the future or fill the silence with someone else's voice. I had my own now, loud, clear, unapologetic. So to the women watching this, the ones still waiting, still wondering, still whispering, maybe someday into their pillows, I want you to hear me. You are not someone's second chance. You are your own first choice. And sometimes the greatest love story is the one you write when you finally stop waiting. If this story felt like a mirror to your heart, if you've ever loved too long, waited too hard, or finally walked away, this is your channel. Ex-Wife Diaries is where your story belongs. Subscribe now, and let's rewrite the endings together. Because you deserve better than almost. You deserve everything.